Hello, so today we're going to be going over the best comps for patch 15.6. This is day 1 of the new patch, and I'm going to go over some reroll and non-reroll comps to give you a little bit of a head start so you have a better experience with your set 15. If you like my content, make sure to like and subscribe. I'm doing daily TFT guides on this channel. Additionally, in the description, there is my VOD channel where I'm going to be posting some updated videos of some of the games from today. So some set 15.6 current patch VODs if you want to see some gameplay as well. So let's get straight into it. For the patch currently, I will say that it is primarily a reroll meta. What do I mean by that? I mean that a lot of the comps that got adjusted or nerfed either were not very heavy on the reroll side of things and were a lot heavier on the non-reroll sides, or just the way things are shaping up. I think that if you have a reroll line, you should typically go for it. So we're going to start by talking about some reroll comps that I think are particularly strong, starting with one of the strongest ones, Jana reroll. So this comp is actually a little bit weird to show here because obviously you might look at this and say 3 out of 1 mentor, what are you doing? Well, there is a power-up for Jana in particular called Veteran. Now, Veteran actually applies to multiple different units, but basically the unit becomes a mentor, and then they get damage amp for your whole team, and they get additional attack damage and ability power instead of upgrading their abilities. So when you play 4 mentor, they will get 30 AD and 30 AP. Now, this recently got nerfed, but compared to some of the other comps, it's still one of the strongest comps in the game. Basically, what you're doing for is Jana reroll with Kabuko 3, and you're going to be playing 4 mentor. When you play 4 mentor, all of the mentor's abilities get upgraded. So Kabuko makes like this giant massive stun that shoots in a straight line towards the furthest unit or whatever. Like he basically snipes backline carries and does like this insane thing. Udyr does anti-heal, which lets your item economy be a little bit better. You don't have to build anti-heal with this comp because Udyr will give it to you, so you can prioritize that a little bit later. And then of course you have Ryze, who can cap out your board really high by doing a lot of damage. This comp, even though Jana got a little bit of a nerf, Ryze actually got a little bit of a buff. So in this particular case, this comp kind of came out as being really strong relative to everything else because it was already strong last patch, and now it's equally as strong, if not stronger, on the current patch. So how do you treat this comp? A lot of time you're going to be rolling on level 6. You're going to try and hit Kabuko 3, Jana 3. Until you hit a Ryze, you can play Yasuo to get 4 mentor because they're all like relatively low cost units. But once you have the Ryze, you usually drop the Yasuo and you play this board. You pair it up with Mighty Mech because it fits really nicely. And then you want to have Protector active because it helps out with the Jana. And then obviously Strategist with the Mighty Mentor and the Ryze works out nicely. And then you get your 4 mentor bonus. And then you can play Senna to get the Mighty Mech in. In terms of items, the items you usually go for on Jana are Blue Buff and Jewel Gauntlet. These are usually your priority items. Jana has a lot of AP because obviously your mentor bonus is going to give her that AP, and she does a decent amount of damage and shielding scaling with that AP, which is nice. The main thing with Jana that you want to think about as well is that she doesn't attack very fast typically, so you could go for like a speed casting build, like something like a Shojin or anything like that, but blue buff is typically the better item on her, so you usually prioritize blue buff because it's going to help her to cast a little bit more efficiently. In terms of her last item, Giant Slayer, I say this on most of my patch notes, most of my descriptions of comps, most of my itemization guides. Currently, Giant Slayer is a really good item. If you could take one thing away from a lot of my videos, it's that Giant Slayer is a great item. It gives a lot of stats. It got buffed recently, and it's just been really good ever since. So the last item here is going to be Giant Slayer. It gives her some extra damage up, some extra base stats, which work really well with her kit. So it's just a great item for her. Now, she already has a lot of damage amp from Strategist, so I've seen other people sometimes put more AP on her, like a Rabadons. I think Archangel's a little bit too slow. I think that Jana really benefits from being strong and like doing like insane damage at the start of a fight. So I think Archangel's a little bit slow. But I've also seen full crit builds with a Strikers that can also work out. But typically speaking, swords are going to be a little bit harder to use with this comp. So having something like a Giant Slayer is going to work out a lot better. Additional AP items could also go on the Ryze. Ryze is a unit that really likes to have Archangels because he's more of a single target type of unit that you're trying to burst down units and scale into late game, or scale into the late ends of the fight. So Archangels works really well. He can also hold some of your utility items because he's going to do a lot of damage with the 4 mentor. And even him, you can build like extra damage amp items, or mostly AP because he has the crit from Executioner and the damage amp from Strategist, so a lot of times base AP or as much AP as possible is going to be beneficial on him. Now, In terms of your Kabuko, Kabuko sometimes has weird itemizations. Currently, I'm not sure which is the best version of Kabuko, but in the past, you would basically go for Sterix. If possible, if you have like Pandora's or something, it was like double Sterix and a Crown Guard or a Protector's Vow. The reason for this was the main power-up that you would go on him was Best Defense. So Best Defense, after granting or receiving shields, you're going to do additional physical damage. This was broken last patch. It was extremely strong. It's still quite good this patch. I just don't know if it's the perfect best item for him. If you're going for a best defense build on the Kabuko, then you want to make sure that you're putting in the shielding items, because those are going to be pretty beneficial. Now, if you don't have the shielding items, you can go for more tank related items. Anything will do, but a lot of times the shielding still works nicely because it does well with his kit to just keep him alive. So these things can work out. Artifacts also are great, like something like an Unending Despair can be good on the Kabuko. Either way, there are other options. You could also go for something like Unstoppable. Just make him an absolute menace because he stuns, and then he stuns, and then he stuns, and then he stuns, and your whole board just keeps stunning. Or you can just go for like other tank related ones that Kabuko rolls so that he's as tanky as possible. But generally speaking, this board sometimes a little bit awkward, so you don't want to play it contested, in my opinion, just because it's really reliant on a lot of the forecasts, right? Cassante, Jarvan, and Ryze really tie the board together, so most of the time you're looking for these units in order to make the board actually functional and strong. Anyways, the next comp I want to talk about is Kog'Maw. So Kog'Maw didn't really get nerfed or adjusted at all. He got kind of indirectly or system changed a little bit, which we'll talk about in a second. But typically with Kog'Maw, you're playing Kog'Maw and you're playing a vertical frontline trait. Now there's many different front lines that you can use, obviously. You can go for all the Bastion units, which is what I'm showing currently. I think this one's the most effective and easiest to play because the Bastions aren't super popular in a lot of the other comps, so it makes it pretty easy to play around them, and you can often find the Leona or even a high roll of Braum to complete your 6 Bastion front line. If you want, there are other options that are equally or like relatively similarly strong as a front line. The other one is Protector. This is the one that a lot of people have a decent amount of success with. I personally like Protector a lot because Jana gives you an outlet to hold utility items, which is really nice. If you're playing the Bastion line, which we'll talk about in a second, usually you have to build frontline utility items because you might not have another backline unit to play. But with Protectors, Jana can hold some of the backline units. The problem with Protectors is that you need to find a Cassante, and everybody plays Cassante. Cassante is one of the best tanks in the game, either as a primary or a secondary tank. Almost every board in the game tries to fit in a Cassante if you can, because he's just a really good unit. So playing Protectors, a little bit harder, because if you don't find the Cassante, Spaghetti-O, you're at 5 out of 4 Protector or whatever. You don't have the 6 Protector bonuses, so your front line is not as tanky. The other alternatives, obviously, are Juggernaut and Heavyweight if you're looking at the frontline traits. Juggernaut is a little bit awkward. I would say that it's not as strong as the other two, and I don't think it caps as high, so you usually only want to angle towards this in very particular spots. And Heavyweight as well is a little bit weird because there's not a solid option as a frontline tank with these builds, right? For example, you're usually going for damage dealing Jace or damage dealing Darius. As you can see, there's not like a reliable 3-cost tank that you can roll for while rolling for the Kog'Maw, so it's a little bit weirder. I would be careful with Heavyweights, but it obviously works if you have a lot of econ and you can hit the Darius and also get Darius items. Then it can like kind of stockpile and work really well with a secondary carry there. But that enough said about the intro of just talk about the different front lines. Primarily when you're playing Kog'Maw, Kog'Maw has an insane amount of attack speed that he gets on cast. So the main items you're going for with Kog'Maw are Shojin, because Shojin's going to help him with every single auto attack to get that cast off. The build that you want for Kog'Maw is basically perma-casting. And then obviously you're going to pair, you're going to pair this with an Archangels, because every one of his attacks does bonus magic damage. So basically what you're looking for is stall out, Kog'Maw ramps up with the Shojin. He gets attack speed every time he casts, so he casts, Shojin helps him to cast, he casts, attack speed, cast, attack speed, cast, attack speed, and then while that's happening, Archangels is ramping up to a point where every single auto attack that Kog'Maw is doing extra magic damage, so he just melts everybody at one point, and that's how you win the fight. So this is really essential. Some people like to put Guinsoo. Guinsoo is not a priority item. A lot of times you'll see Guinsoo or Shojin being built. Usually you're just playing one of the ramping up items to try and get yourself to a point where your Kog'Maw is doing damage, right? So a lot of times you're using these items kind of like as a tempo option to make sure that you're strong in your mid game and your early game, right? If I start the game off with a Kog'Maw and I have Guinsoo components, I'm not going to sit here and not make the Guinsoo, even though I prefer having Shojin as my primary item. I would rather make the Guinsoo, then I'll make the Shojin later, and we'll kind of do something like that. But typically it's like this, and then your last item is flexible. You can even go another damage item, Giant Slayer, like I said before, really good item in the current set. So obviously you can make Giant Slayer. There's also Kog'Maw builds where you can go for more upfront damage instead of the Archangels. Very flexible. The unit is flexible in terms of the itemizations, so you could go for different builds and you'll probably have some sort of success with it. But we'll talk how this comp shines in a second. When you're playing it though, usually you're rolling for Swain 3. If you're in a particularly high roll or good spot, you can also roll for Yasuo 3-star. And then basically you're combining the best of both worlds. You're basically going for like a Yasuo reroll, which is another type of reroll line you can play with 6 Bastion, while also going for the Kog'Maw 3, which actually works out really nicely. In terms of Swain, items are very flexible, but a lot of times you usually end up building utility items for your front line first. Kog'Maw, you have Shred and Sunder, so you don't need that. So usually you're going for some sort of frontline anti-heal because you need somebody to hold the anti-heal. You could go red buff on Kog'Maw as well. This is also a valid option, but it's one or the other just to make sure that you have anti-heal. It's pretty important when you're playing these comps because you're trying to stall out as long as possible. You want to make sure that you have your tank outliving the other tanks. You want to make sure that you're reducing their healing usually. Other than that, Swain's pretty flexible. Your Bastion, so HP items often work really well. Just because you have so much armor and MR from Bastion, you pair that with HP, you make yourself an unkillable tank, right? You want to try and balance the stats to make them as strong as possible. And then obviously Yasuo, you have many different options, but you can go for a full crit build, or you can just put all of the AD items on the Yasuo if you have leftover components, and that can be a secondary carry, or you can go for a secondary tank in the form of the Leona. In terms of fruits for this comp, depending on your build, there's different options. Fairy Tail is an option for Kog'Maw because he casts so much. If you get to a point where you're infinite casting, then you basically spawn infinite fairies, and this can do a lot of extra damage for you. So this is one option. There's also Caretaker, which is a little bit more niche. It used to be very common. Oh wait, I think they removed it from Kog'Maw. I don't see Kog'Maw here. I don't know if they removed it. Kog'Maw used to get this. If they removed it and I didn't see it in the patch notes, my apologies. But this used to be an option for him. I'm assuming it got removed, learning today. But then additionally, there are other options like Bestest Boy. Sometimes you can use just to gain some stacking ability power. Or there's the Surge 66. This one also works pretty well because it just gets you started a lot earlier in terms of your attack speed scaling. Now, some notes about this comp. This comp used to be a very common default option on the previous patch. The reason for that was because, you know, you can just play Kog'Maw. There were so many copies of Kog'Maw. That's like the main thing. Before, Kog'Maw monster pools were bugged, so multiple people can test Kog'Maw. In some lobbies, you can have 3 people hitting a Kog'Maw 3 because basically you just buy from different monster pools and then it would just add up to the Kog'Maw. Apparently that got switched. I haven't thoroughly tested it on the current patch, but now there should only be 22 copies of all the monsters. So not each monster, so cumulatively. So even if you switch or you toggle, it's not going to make it easier to hit Kog'Maw. If somebody in your lobby is contesting Kog'Maw now, you are not going to be able to also contest very easily and both of you hit. Instead, it's going to be a little bit of a struggle. You can still both hit because there's 22 copies, but if somebody's playing Rammus or if somebody's playing Smolder or if another person is playing Kog'Maw, your spot is going to be greatly affected and it's going to be significantly worse. So that's something to make sure that you know. Usually with 3-cost reroll, you want to be uncontested. Kog'Maw, you can technically both hit, but I would still recommend being uncontested. Now, how does this comp really shine? Obviously you can play it from here and then you're playing for like a 3rd or a 4th typically. This comp basically has infinite Ornn artifacts that are broken. So for example, Kog'Maw is really good with Flicker Blades, just infinite speed, just gets infinite stats. He is like basically the solo Lynchbane holder. He just infinitely casts. Lynchbane does damage on every cast. Insane value. Really broken on him there. Then you also have Wit's End in some cases could work on him. You also have Static Shiv. Also works insanely. Every 3rd attack you deal extra ability power. As you can see, there's infinite artifacts that you can hit. And then additionally, you have all the frontline ones that you can put on Swain. Right? All the tank related ones you can put on your frontline. So with this comp, if you're ever playing Kog'Maw, you pretty much always rip an Ornn artifact augment, try and see what artifact you hit. Chances are you're gonna hit something, because like, you know, I think like either somewhere between half the Ornn artifacts and 30%, like somewhere between that number, are usable on this comp in some way, shape, or form. So you just click them and it'll be fine, right? Even if it's not BIS, you have a good chance of just winning the game for free. Sorry, I didn't even mention the Giga broken one, Dawn Core. This one's absolutely fucking broken, right? Where is it? Dawn Core, this one. With this one, you pair this with Fairy Tail, right? With Fairy Tail, this guy's mana reduces so little that basically he's just infinitely casts the fairies and he just melts everybody instantly. It's ridiculous. It's so broken. It's so good. So like stuff like that, absolutely absurd. So obviously, you can see there's a lot of options for you that you can very easily make this board cap extremely high. So keep that in mind. Next comp that we're going to talk about, Battle Academia. So this is going to be talking about Katarina reroll. So Katarina reroll kind of comes in and out of being really broken or really good. I think when there's a reroll patch, Katarina is very good at scamming and winning early game fights, which makes it a very big threat for a lobby, because you basically get a lot of easy placements. You can think of Katarina similar to like how Akali works as a 4-cost line. Just these assassin units that jump around, are very hard to kill, and often could just win you fights very easily. So I think Katarina is in that echelon of a good option to play as a reroll line on the current patch. Typically you go for Katarina 3-star with the what's his name, Rakan 3-star. And then eventually you can try and fit in Protector for Rakan, but usually this is going to be tanky enough and you efficiently roll. When you play Katarina, you always want to play 7 Battle Academia. The potential unlock for Katarina helps her do a lot of extra damage. And she really wants the base AP scaling because she already has Executioner that lets her crit. So Battle Academia typically is a better option for her. And then you usually pair that with the Rise. Rise gives you the Executioner trait active, and he also gives the Mentor bonus. Mentor bonus makes it so that you gain extra mana. With Katarina, she wants to have lots of mana. She wants to cast as many times as possible because it allows her to spin more and just like hit everybody and like melt through a lot of the front line. So mana generation is very important for this comp and for this unit. In terms of the other Battle Academia units, like I said, you want mana gen, so you almost always play the built-in Prodigy units to give the Prodigy bonus, and then you can also put in Bastion to make your front line a little bit more tanky. In some situations, you can also go for Caitlyn 3 while rolling for these units, because alongside the Katarina, you can also have the Caitlyn try and snipe some backline carries and just like delete the units ahead of time, because then they have to worry about Katarina jumping them and they have to worry about Caitlyn. So a lot of times you can position your Katarina and your Caitlyn on the same side. Katarina's jumping over here, Caitlyn's shooting over there. What do? They're fucked, right? That's just how it works. They're screwed. There's nothing they can do. We'll talk about positioning in a second. I just want to go over items. So in terms of Katarina, a lot of times Hodge is really good, right? You get Crit Glove, which scales her Executioner crit chance, which allows her to more easily get a crit with her ult. And also it gives some mana regen, so it's just a really good item for her. So usually Hodge is a priority. Healing, extra stats, mana gen, and crit, everything that you want in an item. In terms of the other items, this is where it's a little bit debated on what to do and what to put on the unit. Me personally, I'm on the side of putting Edge of Night on Katarina. It used to be very common. Edge of Night basically makes it so that if you get past a certain HP threshold, so 60% HP, you become untargetable and you shed negative effects. Basically, it de-aggros. So while Katarina is spinning and jumping around, sometimes she ends up in like, you know, behind enemy lines, and then instead of getting one tapped, Edge of Night makes it so that she doesn't get hit. Or when she gets hit, she basically can de-aggro, and then she can stay roaming around the back line and just kill everything without having to worry about taking too much damage. I think the second lease at life is very important, so I usually go for Edge of Night as a priority. But a lot of people, especially really good players that are much better than me, are trying to say that Edge of Night isn't as good as just going for more damage on her in certain cases. And while I agree with that, I think if I'm making a guide for like all players, I think this is the more consistent and easier way to play the unit. So I would go for Hodge, Edge of Night, and then my +1 item, which in this case usually is going to be something that works with the crit. So Strikers works really well. Giant Slayer could also work, but you really want to make sure she has like close to 100% crit, because the crit does so much damage for her and it's so important for her kit, the way that she's jumping around and trying to one-tap units. So usually you pair it with a crit item, so I think this is usually good. Additionally, sometimes people go Nashers. Nashers just allows her to cast more. right? You get 2 bonus mana if you're critically striking, and that's where the Edge of Night kind of gets a little bit taken out, because if you make Nashers and you go for this type of build, you can often go for either triple damage like this, or even a QSS, and just build her similar to like an Akali, where she just jumps around and continues to cast, because the casting is really important for the Katarina. But like I said, I usually go for Edge of Night, and I try and scale my AP through augments and other means to make her do enough damage. I think that's a more consistent thing, but that's more my advice. If you don't want to do the Edge of Night, you can do something else. Rakan, tank items, not super important. You can just make any tank items you can. A lot of times Yuumi does a lot of damage with this comp, so if you have utility items, you can also put them on the Yuumi, or leftover AP items can also go on the Yuumi. So you have those potential outs as well to if you don't want to make frontline utility items to make sure your Rakan is stable or in a good spot. Now, in terms of the power-ups, before a big check for power-ups was over 9,000, right? Over 9,000 on Katarina. The reason this is so important on Katarina is because it can roll mana gen. We were talking before how mana gen is super important on Katarina. This is what makes this broken. If you roll multiple mana gens with over 9,000, it makes a noticeable difference in how powerful your Katarina is. In addition to giving base stats, which she scales really well with, because obviously she's an executioner, so she's gonna crit. So giving her base stats and making those crits more likely, making those crits do more damage with a good crit build is gonna be very meaningful. So these are things that really matter. And even if you low roll some of the other stats, she's a frontline unit, so she can make use of stuff like the tankiness stats as well. So generally, over 9,000, really good. If you don't have over 9,000, another scaling thing you can do, I've seen some people do, is Max Arcana. Just because with Max Arcana or Max Arcana, I know people say it different ways, but I don't know. I just flip-flop because somebody always tells me I'm saying it wrong. But basically, you gain 20 ability power and you stack with every 2 takedowns. So if you're strong early and you're getting a lot of takedowns on stage 2 and stage 3, you can actually gain a lot of AP this way, and then your Katarina basically hits a critical mass and can be one-tapping everybody. Besides this, you have some of the other options like Crimson Veil, which you can go for. Instead of Hodge, you can go for more damage items and you get your Omnivamp that way, similar to an Akali build. Or you can go for Dark Amulet. This one's a little bit riskier because you take some damage before you do your cast, but you heal for your magic damage and you gain stacking ability power, which is pretty nice, especially since Katarina loves to cast a lot. If you have a decent casting build on her, you can get a lot of AP this way. But there are other options, but typically you're going for a scaling option. She does really well with the scaling options because she's usually strong early, you can usually cheese a lot of fights, and then you get yourself in a good spot for late game. Additionally, she's also really good with different artifacts. This is another comp like Kog'Maw that you rip an Ornn artifact on. Dawn Core, broken. Take Dawn Core on her, it's really good. Additionally, Zhonya's extremely broken, because Zhonya's is basically just a better Edge of Night for her, because it gives her more stats, ability power, and it gives her the in-target ability, which is really broken. So that's obviously really good on her. And then there's a couple other options here, I think, like that you can either use for other units in terms of tank, but usually those are the 2 main ones that you're going for on Katarina. I think she also sometimes does good with some of the other more niche ones, but I don't want to bait you guys and give you guys some like hocus pocus tech. But typically it's Dawn Core or Zhonya. Zhonya is really important typically. But anyways, when you're positioning your units, sometimes people do this split positioning. It's just trying to divide up the front line to make it easier for the Katarina to isolate units and jump around. I would say not to get baited too much by doing this positioning. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Just try and find yourself in a spot where your Katarina is able to see a path to the back line. Katarina jumps between 2 hex ranges, so obviously if they have a front line and back line, it's gonna be hard to jump straight to the back line. So what you're trying to do is like kill a unit, have her walk somewhere, and like find a way of like, you know, try and find the path, you know, like if I'm looking here and there's like a unit here, you know, try and treat it like checkers, you know, like try and envision where she can go, and that might help you a little bit more. If not, usually you can split your front line to opposite sides, make the Katarina kind of jump around, have a little bit of an easier time getting a wrap, because obviously if you split the front line, she kills this side, then she just walks up and kills the back line over there. That's like the main idea. So you want to put this positioning and have the Katarina on the same side as the enemy carry. As an honorable mention to some other reroll comps that I didn't really talk about on this video, I think that, like I said, I think this patch is a very reroll heavy patch. I think the reroll lines, especially the ones I showed, are very dominant and powerful. Of course, it's day 1 of the patch. Things can work out a little bit differently, but I'm just not super confident in a lot of the 4-cost lines unless you have a really good spot for them. So if you have a reroll line, it will probably be okay to play, and you could probably play any reroll line from a good spot. So obviously, hero augments are going to be good. If you have a hero augment option, you can definitely play towards those. Additionally, Bastion Yasuo, we talked about it a little bit with Kog'Maw, but if you want to cut out the Kog'Maw and just play Bastion Yasuo, this can work out. This is usually what I would recommend only with like extended range. I think the Yasuo really wants to have a range extender for this comp to really be like powerful and functional, so I would be careful about that. Additionally, Malzahar with heavyweights is back, in my opinion. It just has some bad matchups, right? Obviously, if you get sniped from either a Katarina, and when we talk about the 4-cost and Akali, it can be really devastating. But 6 heavyweight frontline, itemized Darius, itemized Malzahar is another option. If it becomes more prevalent, I will talk about it in a bit. But Malzahar is a really good fruit now that they just added to the game that I think is a little bit broken. I forget what it's called. It's like the venomous one. I could probably go on patch notes. Let me just do patch notes so it's a little bit easier. Because I don't want to have to search for it. I forget what the name is. It's a new one. It's a new one. Excuse me for it being a new one. So these are the current patch notes. It is Noxus Trap. This one. Basically, damage you do burns, wounds, shreds, sunders enemies for 4 seconds. Now, it's not a 30% shred sunder, but 20% is enough. It's fine because he's hitting whole board. But it also burn in wounds. So Malzahar gets it, Senna gets it, Jana gets it, Twisted Fate. Now, obviously, if you're playing towards a fast 9 comp, Twisted Fate's a great option. But for Malzahar in particular, this allows you to build full damage on Malzahar because you basically go for this. Now you don't have to build a burn wound item and you don't have to build a shred sunder item. Instead, you just build towards the Malzahar. And the shred sunder is great because a lot of times when you're playing Malzahar, you pair it with heavyweights and Darius, right? And Darius does AD damage, so now you just cut out basically 3 items that you would normally have to make. Excuse me. Yeah, you would normally have to make, so it's very efficient for your itemization. Additionally, very good comp with Blinding Jewel because he's a great Blinding Jewel holder. So obviously, you have Ornn Artifact options and you have options to make this comp work. Additionally, Jace Caitlyn, there's lots of other rerolls. I think Kale from certain spots obviously has win out potential if you make it to level 9. There's the new Lux line that might be okay, but I don't have much faith in it, so I don't want to talk about it too much here. But there's a Lux fruit that shine brighter that makes her kind of do a lot of damage. It just got buffed, but I still think it's not quite as strong as everything else. And then obviously we have Crew as well. All I'm trying to say is that if you have a reroll line, probably take it. I think that's what kind of patch this is, just because the reroll lines seem very dominant. So you usually want to be on the same tempo as the rest of your lobby. So reroll is usually that option there. Now, let's talk about some... Let me clear this. Let's talk about some non-reroll comps. So I mentioned that it's primarily a reroll patch, but there are still some good options for non-reroll comps in my opinion. One of the ones that you're going to see very common is actually going to be this one, which is the Akali comp. Akali got a little bit of a nerf, but she is still in a very good state right now. And Akali is a little bit of a nuisance, a little bit difficult to deal with. If you are watching this and you want to know more about Akali, I actually have a how to avoid Akali video. It's in my TFT guides playlist, or you can just Google Akali on search Akali on my gaming channel. But basically, I already talked about how she kind of works in terms of positioning. So we're not going to go over it too much here. But basically with Akali, you want her to cast a bunch and get to the enemy backline. So typically you're putting her either here or here, either third from the left or third from the right, and then with 4 hex range, she'll jump to the corner and kill an enemy carry. If people are not paying attention or if they're not positioning well, you just farm them for free LP every single game. If they're paying attention, there are traps and ways around Akali, and then it becomes like a very, very convoluted positioning war against you and the other players. So obviously you can look at the guide and see some of those tips and tricks. But with Akali, the items are pretty specific. A lot of times you're playing Akali with double Nashers and a QSS. Now the reason you're doing these items in particular, Akali is an Executioner with Supreme Cell. When you're playing this board, you play Executioners and Supreme Cell, so she has damage jump and crit. What you care about a lot on the Akali is base stats, as well as like making sure that the crit is scaled up so that she's always critting. What works out really well for her is a casting build, because as much damage as she does, what you care about more is making sure that she's jumping around, because when she jumps around, she becomes untargetable for a little bit, or she becomes hard to kill. So basically by her jumping around, it basically wastes a lot of the enemy's time, and it makes it harder for her to die. So having her chain cast, or casting as frequently as possible, is going to be important. Additionally, if you cast a bunch, every time she casts, all the marked enemies take damage. So as long as you tag the enemy carry early in a fight, if she keeps casting, eventually that enemy carry will just get deleted. So that's a really big part of her kit, and it's really important. So basically what you're looking for is Nashers. Nashers gives your base stats, as well it gives you the effect of 2 bonus mana, increased to 4 if you're critically striking, and because she already is critically striking, it's a crit build, it works really well. So double Nashers basically makes it so she casts in really fast. I think it takes either 2 or 3 autos for her to cast, which is really powerful. So she just jumps around constantly, marks everybody, and then at one point she just deletes everybody. QSS makes it so she can't get stunned, and it gives her the attack speed, which pairs with the whole build of auto attacks giving her mana. So this is a pretty reliable build. There are some flexible options here. Obviously, you could build her like some survivability, some other crit items, some more damage, but mostly speaking, you're going to be prioritizing these 3 items. The unit is, in my opinion, is noticeably worse with other builds. So if you're going for Akali, make sure that you have good items, or else you might lose out because it's a little bit of an awkward comp. In terms of your front line, you play 3 Supreme Cell because it gives you like the extra bonus effects. You could play 4 Supreme Cell, but typically you'd rather pair it with more frontline. So Mighty Mech and the Protector Cassante typically helps out, as well as Jarvan. In terms of your other items, you're playing Jarvan, so obviously making a Protector's Vow for Jarvan is going to be a good option because he can just stun and sway the fight. You want your front line to be tanky enough and stable enough to support the Akali jumping around, and additionally having it disrupt with the Jarvan and the Cassante is really important. So position your Jarvan and your Cassante to annoy the enemy carries, right? Cassante in front of enemy carry, Jarvan in a spot where he jumps on the enemy carry is going to make a huge impact for this team. Additionally, you could put extra utility items on Rise if you so need, but a lot of times you build towards frontline items instead, because the Rise without the Formentor is a little bit worse for wear. But you could obviously put utility on Rise, or you can put utility on your frontline. Either or is totally fine. When you cap this board, a lot of times you play another Executioner, so when you level up, you can play another Lee Sin. Lee Sin Executioner got buffed, so he's a little bit better, so you can have some AD items ready for him. Additionally, something that a lot of people don't really do or don't really talk about that much, you can actually just play double Akali, right? I'm not saying go for Akali 3-star. You can literally just play 2 Akali 2-stars and just have them both jump at the opponent. Like GG, like good luck position against this shit. This is actually a pretty reliable other carry that you can do that often you can hit if you go level 9 and you're uncontested on Akali. So that's just another option. In terms of fruits, the main Akali fruit that you usually go for is Crimson Veil. So there's not many other fruits that are good on Akali, so this one's a little bit particular. With the build that you're going, you don't have any form of survivability, right? You're playing Akali with mana gen and attack speed, so you want this Akali to have some sort of Omnivamp or some sort of survivability. So giving her Crimson Veil gives her the Omnivamp, and then additionally, the overhealing will become a shield. So the shield will give her a lot of survivability, because now, you know, she's gaining a shield. If she's full health and she's de-aggroing, she's hard to track down, hard to kill. This gives her a lot of survivability, which is really powerful. Additionally, because you're playing this board, the shielding matters a lot, because Protector makes it so that when she gets a shield, she also gets a little bit of durability. So it helps your board survivability a lot. So Crimson Veil is usually what you're going for. The other options are kind of bait. So you kind of have to, especially if you're going this build, you really have to go for Crimson Veil. If you don't have these items, you can maybe alternate some like other damage or healing items, then go for like a damage or other style of fruit, but typically this is what you're going to end up with. Next board that I want to talk about, Star Guardian. So this board was a real problem on the last patch. I think that it is still playable on this patch. It's just significantly worse. Before, it used to be like a 4-way Star Guardian contest, but nowadays I think that you really want to be uncontested when you play Star Guardian. When you play Star Guardian, you're basically playing around Poppy and Jinx, and it's a little bit particular to what fruits you're going for, so we'll talk about some different builds. Sorry, take a sip of water. So for Jinx, a lot of times, you'll go one of two builds. You'll either go for full damage on Jinx, which usually composed of Giant Slayer, really good item on her, Infinity Edge, really good item on her, and then some sort of AD item like either a Death Blade or a Kraken or a what's it called? Where is it? Oh, you know what? Whatever. DB or Kraken. One of these two. Or you can go like a Striker is what I was going to say. Which can also pair with the build. Otherwise, you're typically going for the similar damage items. Obviously, the Striker... Sorry, the... I'll put a Kraken. Let me just organize this a little bit better. We did talk about Jinx a lot on the last patch, so I'm just kind of going to glaze over this one a little bit. Usually you go for... Giant Slayer because it's just a really good item. I say this all the time. Make sure you remember it, commit it to memory. And then the Infinity Edge. And then you go for a mana gen item, which is Shojin usually. The old fruit that used to be really good on her, which I think is still pretty good on her, is Gather Force. I just don't think it's like Giga Broken. It used to be Giga Broken. But the idea is on cast you gain stacking damage equal to 40% of mana. It used to be 45%. But basically, if Jinx casts like a couple times or once or twice, she already has like a Death Blade's worth of extra AD. So this actually is a very efficient way to scale up her total damage. So that's typically what you went for, and that's why you would build a Shojin on her. But you can also build for full damage. That's also fine. In terms of the rest of your board, you're usually playing Poppy. Poppy was usually paired with Best Defense, which looked something like this. You basically stack all the shielding items. We talked about Best Defense a little bit before, and then Best Defense would just do an infinite amount of damage. Best Defense also got nerfed, and Star Guardian itself, the Jinx bonus and the Xayah bonus got nerfed. So overall, this comp is significantly nerfed from the last iteration of it. But if you are uncontested, it is definitely a worthwhile comp. I still think Best Defense is fine on Poppy if you go for a full shield build. If not, then you're going for all the other stuff like Unstoppable, right? Unstoppable Poppy is a little bit of a nuisance. Or you're going for other tank related ones. Anything that can work out is pretty good. I think they're all pretty fine. Additionally, when you're playing Star Guardian, a lot of times you don't care too much about getting to the max Star Guardian anymore. Rather, you would want to fill in the board with either Cassante or, what's his name? Braum, and then a lot of times you play Varus to get Sniper late game. Pairing these in, you can alter and drop some of the Star Guardians if you don't have them, to make your front line a little bit more cohesive and a little bit stronger relative to the amount of damage that you need to do. A lot of them work well with the Gather Force build as well, because if you have more front line, the Jinx has more time to scale up and do a lot of damage. Now, obviously, I want to temper expectations. This comp isn't Giga Broken anymore. I still think it's going to be strong and reliable, but you have to be uncontested because hitting the upgrades is going to be a lot more important and a lot more a lot more necessary for your board in order to function. It's not something like you can play out like last patch where everybody just contests it and plays it and it's like good. But it is still a playable comp in my opinion. Of course, I think the forecasts are all in a really awkward spot right now because a lot of them do require you to hit your upgrades. If we're talking about another forecast comp that you can play, there's also Soul Fighter. Now with Soul Fighter, usually you're playing around Samira. Samira, often you can go mana gen on her, similar to Jinx, or you can go for just full damage, but most of the time you'll see something like a Shojin or a blue buff, either or, but you'll see something like this, right? And a full crit build. Because typically the full crit build is going to work really nicely on the Samira to do a bunch of damage. Additionally, she gets a bunch of base stats from Soul Fighter, so it works really effectively. Now this comp, it is really awkward. Usually you're trying to play either 8 Soul Fighter for the stability of the HP, or you're trying to play this version, which is 6 Soul Fighter, but you're playing Braum and Volibear as well. A Soul Fighter emblem helps out a lot because then you can play around 8 Soul Fighter while also being able to play the Volibear and the Braum. The Braum Volibear cap is really high, and that's why this comp I think gets a mention here as one of the playable forecast lines in my opinion. But it's a little bit awkward because it does require a lot of gold and you often want to play it from ahead. It's very dependent on Gwen and Volibear. If you hit one of them, you're usually fine. If you hit none of them, it's a little bit rocky. If you hit both of them, you're in a really good spot. So obviously, as being a level 8 comp, you kind of want to play it from ahead because you either want to have the HP to live long enough to make it to 9, or you want to have the ability to stay on level 8 with a lot of HP and then, like, you know, in a worst case scenario, roll and try and hit something to salvage the game. If you're not in either of those spots and you're playing this from behind, or you're playing it from like a limping spot where you don't have a good opener, you don't have a lot of HP, then this board is going to be noticeably worse, and it's going to be way harder for you to stabilize. Obviously, you can also build towards Volibear. Volibear can build melee items or even attack speed items. They're both fine on him. And in those cases, you have a really high cap, especially with the 8 Soul Fighter with the emblem and playing everybody here. But otherwise, you're usually going for 8 Soul Fighter. And you're usually going for 6 Soul Fighter nowadays. Soul Fighter itself also got nerfed on 6 and 8 Soul Fighter in terms of how much HP you have, so the comp is a little bit more squishy as well. But in terms of the other 4-cost lines, I feel like this one has the greatest chance of stabilizing and capping really high compared to some of the other lines. But like I said, even the Star Guardian board, like, this got nerfed a lot, so it's obviously going to be way worse compared to some of the other comps, right? This comp would sometimes lose to Jana on last patch, but this comp got nerfed a lot, and the Jana comp seems totally the same as it was last patch. So, like, relatively speaking, like, there's a noticeable shift in how strong this line is, and the same thing with Soul Fighter. I think Soul Fighter is going to have trouble stabilizing and being strong, but that's why I say, if you play from ahead, it's a decent spot. But that's what I mean by I say reroll meta. Additionally, there are many other lines that you can play that are 4-cost lines. We talked about Soul Fighter a little bit here. Oh, sorry, I should also mention the fruits and stuff before we move on. In terms of this line as well, Gwen, you can often put some utility items on her. She does great with, like, Morello, just spreading it on the whole board. And Set, you can go for many tank items. In terms of your power-ups, you need to have On the Edge, in my opinion, for Samira. I think this is so essential. If you build Samira with crit and you have a bunch of stats from Soul Fighter, you want the damage amp. So this gives you the damage amp. Samira has the ability to heal up this HP because she gets Omnivamp from her kit. So this is basically essential. In my opinion, if you're playing Soul Fighter and you don't have On the Edge, the comp doesn't function well. So this is one of the key parts. If you're playing Soul Fighter and your comp is, like, not feeling very strong, or Samira is not doing damage, this is a really important part. A lot of the other fruits are not very useful, not very helpful for her. You want On the Edge on her in order for this comp to function in a well state. And then obviously Set, you have multiple options. Tankzilla, like, you know, tank ones, anything that kind of keeps them alive is fine and will help out your board. Now, in terms of other lines, we talked about Soul Fighter already. Sorks is also good, but Sorks, you often want to play from a similar spot of being in a head, because finding a Gwen is really important. If you hit the Gwen or you have the Gwen early, obviously things can work out. If you don't hit the Gwen, this comp's going to be a little bit awkward, a little bit hard to cap out, and you can often find yourself in a really bad spot. Additionally, Yuumi, Leona, or Battle Academia Yuumi, I think that if you hit Yuumi 2 and Leona 2 and you can make it to 5 Prodigy, which usually requires you to be level 9, this comp is very strong and can often place first and do really well, but all these lines are very conditional. Depending on your spot, I would recommend finding a reroll line. If you don't have a reroll line, I would recommend being uncontested and playing these from an advantage, right? I would try and play my early game and mid game as aggressively as possible to make sure that I don't lose too much HP to the other reroller lines, and then try and play one of these based on what my items are, which items work out better for which comp. If you want to know more about these, I talk about lots of these comps on my channel. You can check it out as well, and it will give you a little bit more insight on that. Additionally, there are some Fast 9 options. Juggernaut, Fast 9 around, or even Bastion frontline. TF Zyra is a lot better. They both got buffed. Zyra does a lot of damage now, so you often can build towards these as your backline carries, then you build like an insane vertical frontline. Juggernaut Lee Sin is broken. If you ever have a chance to play Juggernaut Lee Sin, you just play him, because it's just like, he's just broken. It's just ridiculous. And then of course there are spots where Mech is good. I still think it got a little bit of a nerf, but not really. So if you can play 7 Mighty Mech, this feels more like a Fast 9 comp because you need to hit the Yone. But if you hit a Yone early and you can pivot into 7 Mighty Mech, it's really good. I still think 5 Mighty Mech is kind of shit, even though it got buffed. So I wouldn't necessarily think I'm stable with 5 Mighty Mech. But if you hit 7 Mighty Mech, then you can play around the Mighty Mech boards. Like I said, I don't think it's super relevant. And I think that if you want to know more about it, you can check out my How to Play Mighty Mech guide. It's in the How to Play videos on my channel. So check that out later. But anyways, those are all the comps that I would try and recommend. Of course, there are many other options. There are a lot of stuff that are like right in that niche of like, if you have a good spot for it, it's really good. And if you don't have a good spot for it, it's really bad. But one thing I want to write home about right now at the start of this patch, I would recommend angling towards reroll. It feels like a reroll kind of meta. And if that's not your cup of tea, I know it's not my cup of tea. You know, it might be a little bit of a, you know, muster around and see how things kind of shape up over the course of the next week or so. But anyways, thanks for watching. Have a great day. Before I go, one last thing I want to mention is I'm going to start doing more frequent member uploads. So if you ever want coaching, if you want stuff like that, there is members only content that I'm going to try and put, which is going to be a little bit more detailed, or some extra stuff that I'm going to do behind the scenes, talking about, like, you know, maybe more frequent updates, some stats review, things like that, stats deep diving, and things like that. Level 1 members, you get access to videos. Level 2, you get a VOD review. And level 3, you would get a coaching session. So if you're interested in any of that, I'm going to start advertising at the end of videos, because I'm going to be a little bit more frequent and good about it, because I think I'm at a point now where I can kind of structure my time such that I'm also posting on members in addition to the other channels that I have. But thanks for watching. Have a great day, and hopefully this was helpful. See ya. Bye-bye.